Okay, so I guess the agenda. Um, we're gonna talk about the web for 15 minutes. We'll cover what is it, why do we use it, how is it made, and like an intro to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which is what we like to use when we program on the web. And then we'll have a break for questions, and then we will start creating our own site from scratch for 35 minutes. So let's start with what is the web? I'm sure we've all, seen the web. We've all, used a website at some point, I would hope. Zoom does links, but it doesn't really need an introduction. It's a system where documents and other web resources are identified by uniform resource locators. So that's a dictionary definition, but I'm sure we all know about the web. And so why do we use it? So, there are a lot of reasons to use the web. It's easy to learn. It's easy to connect to lots of different, people, reach a lot of far corners. And it's, we use it to be productive. I've multiple times made apps that are not on the web, and you spend so much time working around things just because they aren't on the web. Like you have to upload them onto other people's computers. You have to figure out how other people's computers work. And so the web helps us avoid all of that. But more specifically, why do we make web apps? Well, they're accessible from anywhere. As I said, desktop applications need to be installed on local computers. Once in high school, we made a scheduling app for a teacher, and we had to keep installing it onto his computer, and every time there was a bug, we'd have to reinstall it. And that's just a waste of time. It's a waste of time, and it's a hassle. And web apps should be accessible from every computer with a browser, which is just computers at this point. We all have some kind of browser, I would assume. It's no hassle to update. Again, you don't have to go into a person's computer and update it and be like, here is my new release. You can just be like, this is the website. You can keep going to it, Again, versus desktop apps. And you only need one version, right? Because we don't have to deal with the fact that there are different kinds of computers. I have a Mac and someone else might have a Windows, and they may work in completely separate ways. And we don't want to have to figure those things out. So since the app runs in the browser, we only need to make one version. This saves money and it saves time. And so, to be fair though, some browsers do have quirks, so sometimes you have to work around a browser. But that's okay. And I guess now we'll talk about my experience. So why have I made web apps personally, and why do I make them in Sandbox? So I started programming in high school, and I didn't make a web app until my first co-op. And so I've learned over time that making desktop apps and making things that don't run on the web tend to be it's just a lot more goes wrong, right? Because I feel like when you're making something on the web, you can see it in your browser. And so when you then deploy it out, you'll know how it will work. Whereas if I'm making something on my computer and then I put it onto somebody else's computer, I don't know for sure it's going to work. But I also find that it's incredibly easy to find resources for making web apps, because it's such a popular medium nowadays. So, people all around are making web apps, and so you can Google anything and somebody has the answer. So I'm the lead for our chem informatics project at Sandbox, and so we do a very low level front end web app. We don't have a lot of design going on. It's not super pretty. But using a web app really allows us to very easily install it on very easily let our researchers use it, as opposed to, I go into their lab and manually install updates. They just go to our website and it's a much better experience. Yeah, I just think it's easier to make web apps than it is to make other apps. And I think it's more fun because you can show people them easier, it's more fun because you can be like, just visit the website, look how cool it looks. So yeah. And I think I said, yeah, so how do we make web experiences? There's easy ways, we've all seen these websites like Wix and Weebly and Squarespace and GoDaddy, where you can just make a website, right? And they have templates and they show you how to do it, and it's very simple. Maybe takes 5 minutes, maybe takes more, it depends on what you're doing. But it's a very simple experience. And they're great, you know, they're really great because it's so easy and you can go so fast, and then suddenly your thing's on the internet. And it allows you to go super, super fast. And it really takes away a lot of that time that you might otherwise spend thinking about, like, how do I do this? How do I get this to work? But they do have limitations, right? They can be pricey over time, and they're kind of limited. They kind of box you in. So if you want to do something more creative and more like unique, I think it's better to just do it yourself. And I think that brings us to Iman.
All right. So now we can talk a little bit about how to get that done, the code that is involved. And eventually, in coming up workshops, we'll learn a little bit more about React, Node.js, Angular, which are different frameworks that you can use, which make it a little fancier. So starting on the languages that we're going to be talking about today, start off with HTML. This is not a programming language. This is a markup language. So this HTML basically will give you the skeleton, bare bones of what you want your website to look like. This is for adding things like images, links, text bodies, like dividing lines. So what HTML is primarily for is just building the text and like shape of your website. So what does this look like? So we have these little tags that you see on the page. The first tag, HTML, this is telling the document, yeah, this is HTML. The next tab, head. The tag is for metadata in the document. This stuff you don't see on the website at all. Stuff like the title here, this is what will show up on the when you have the tab of the website up on your computer. This is where it'll say Oasis homepage instead of just like blank. And then in the second half of here, you see body. This is where you see your actual website. This is the contents that you'll see on the page. H1, this is for creating a header. This is essentially like a large font title. A little confusing with title in H1, but this one is for actual text on your page. And then the A here with href, this is what adds a link to the page. So you take a look at it here, this is what it'll render into. So one thing you'll see about this, it's a little ugly. So let's make it prettier. But how does HTML work? This is written in code editor or just a basic text editor saved in an HTML file. HTML files you can link it directly from your browser. Like any code that you have on your computer, you can open it up in your browser.
Side note really quick, if that HTML code looks a little confusing to you right now, don't worry, we're going to go over that more later. This is just kind of like an intro. Go ahead.
Okay, so now we want to make our HTML look a little prettier. So to do that, we need CSS. CSS is also not a programming language. This is a style sheet language. This is 100% what makes your website look prettier. So this will change up your HTML tags. This will change things like color, whether it's centered, how your page is structured, essentially. So what does this look like in terms of actual code? Here is a quick example of it. This starting part, the selector, you can put either one of the tags that you were using, some of the ones that you saw in your HTML, like H1 or A, or you can also put a different type of tag that you can put specifically for one section of your page. Then between you have the open and close brackets. Anything that goes in there is what the rules are for that specific selector that you put. And then the rules are things like changing the font size, color, stuff like that. We'll get more examples later in the demo. And this is what it looks like after it has been rendered. So this, we made our text a little bigger and we changed the color. You can do a lot of other fancier things with CSS, but that's just a little quick example. And now JavaScript. This is actually a programming language, the fancy one I'm sure you've heard of. This is what actually lets us do things with our page. This is what allows our page to be dynamic. So if we had a button in HTML, before it would just be a plain button without JavaScript, but with JavaScript you can actually make that button do something. You can make it change the page, modify the HTML. So we link our HTML files to JavaScript code to allow it to do those things. Like I was just saying before, this allows us to change and delete HTML elements, change the styles dynamically, and change the content with different features like clicking buttons or hovering. So what about React, Angular, those things we saw earlier? Those buzzwords, those are JavaScript frameworks and libraries. They allow you to do a lot fancier things than just pure HTML, make it a lot easier. But at the end of the day, they just compile down to JavaScript and HTML. So to give a little bit on my experience, how did I first start coding websites and how did I improve? So my first experience with doing making a website was a similar, like one of these workshops where they're like, hey, let's make a website. And I did pretty bare bones HTML. And then from there, I didn't actually get into it much more. But then when I joined Sandbox, we dove right in with React and Redux. And so it definitely made that transition a little bit harder for me to not have known as much HTML before. So I would highly recommend getting more experience with HTML, practicing a bit on your own. And then I ended up having to afterwards practice doing just pure HTML, JavaScript, which felt like a bit of a downgrade. But it definitely helped with basics.
Really quick, adding on to that, did you feel like when working on your current Sandbox project, like what strategies did you use to like kind of learn new tech for that?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of the things, it was really just a lot of Googling at the end of the day, reading the React documentation. For most, like both React, HTML, you can find resources online that'll allow you to, or like help you with tutorials to build up a website and learn the skills a lot better. So in summary, we can code our own custom website using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Eventually, we can use these languages to do React or in any other of those frameworks we mentioned before to give us a lot more power. I think I see a question in the chat. Explain more about JavaScript. Oh, so where it falls in terms of the big picture. So to give like a brief example, if you have so with HTML and CSS, it's really just like a pure blank page. It doesn't do anything. You can click buttons, you can, like there can be buttons on the page, but if you click it, it won't do anything. This allows you to, like, as you go, dynamically change it. So say you have a text field and you have a button, and you want when you click the button for that text to show up from the text field. JavaScript is what allows you to grab that text and put it somewhere else. And then, okay, is there a reason that you would want to code a website versus using a product like Wix? So one reason that you would want to do a website versus using like Wix or Weebly, for me personally, so I've used Weebly a little bit. I haven't used Wix. Weebly was very annoying to use. It wasn't very customizable in terms of if you want to do like a much bigger website, like for example, if you want to do something that allows you to have like for example, our Sandbox project that has like drag and drop blocks, that wouldn't be allowed, or you wouldn't be able to do something like that in Wix. but it is definitely a good option if you just want to do a basic website.
You guys can also ask questions to Iman and Aislin, like about their, their own like coding experiences. They're both like sandbox project leads now, so like their experience with that, or what kind of tech they use, or anything else in the presentation.
Okay. So at the front end, you can use CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. How does that tie into the back end? Okay, yeah, so front end, CSS, HTML, JavaScript. How that ties into the back end. So for the most part, back end, front end, kind of separate. Back end would really be for storing data. So if you have like a login capability on your website, you can use that's where your back end will come in. So back end really is just a point that your front end like asks like, hey, can you send me, or this person wants to log in, they type in their login, sends it to the back end, checks if that's a real user, and then the back end will send back saying like, yes, this is a real user, no, this isn't. That's like one way to think of the tie-in. There's like a whole lot of different languages for back end. So it could be like a lot of different versions. Yeah.
We're also gonna be talking more about backend in 2 weeks, so this is more like
Come to other Oasis presentations.
all right. I'll ask a quick question. What is your I guess either one of you, what's like the most impactful project you've worked on, web project like this?
For me, this summer I took a break from the project I lead in Sandbox to work on the Corey Office Hours app. And while I was working on it, I knew that I would be a TA in the fall. And so every time I would put work into it, I would think about the fact that I would have to use it, right? Like every time I coded something, I was like, if it doesn't work, I'm going to be the one who's like, what idiot coded this? And it would be me. But it's also been like really interesting to like have such a hands-on like viewing of something that you did, like it's very interesting to like see how people on board to that, how they use it, and see like what they think as opposed to like what you think when you're just obsessing over it for 4 months. But it's really the first time I've done a project and like I can just see so clearly how it's working and how people like it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that it's might be using Curry office hours, but it's definitely huge. Seeing people like, because web projects are easy to have other people use too, which is a really huge plus.
On a similar vein, the project I'm working on for Sandbox right now, which is Graduate NU, that would feels like the most impactful as well, just because so Graduate is used to help plan your schedule for Northeastern students. It feels a lot more connected to what we're actually like, what my real life is like, in a similar way, where it's like, if this is what I should be able to use to plan my schedule, and if I don't feel like I can plan my schedule with this, how can we release this? Because this is what it's for, and I can really hands-on feel like it'll impact me as well.
We'll give about 1 more minute for questions if anyone has any other. We'll move on. All right. Oh, we got 1 more.
I would say that, so the question is how much time does it take to how much time does it require to master HTML and CSS? I don't think that it takes a ton of time, but I also I wouldn't say that I've like mastered it. I think HTML, like the skill of learning it is not so much that like you know every tag and you know every, you know, every visual thing, but it's more that like you can Google it and you know how to find it. And so like, you know, like the basic syntax and you just know how to put the pieces together. So I don't think it takes that long. I think it kind of takes like an afternoon of just messing around to get it.
I think there's also a Corey office hours question above.
How difficult was it to do Corey office hours? I don't know. It was interesting, but like everyone on the team was like very capable, you know, like none of us were just inept. And it was nice to work on because it was fun to be a part of a group of people that like really wanted to work on this and like really wanted to output so much effort in such a short period of time. So I feel like every project is difficult in some way or form. Like at some point you're going to be writing code and you're going to be like, I don't know how to do this. But you kind of just, you keep going. And I think the people around you help.